Hello, and welcome to School to Homeschool. I am Janae Daniels. I'm a wife, a mother of six, and a former middle school teacher turned homeschool mom. I have kids in their 20s all the way down to elementary age and everything in between. Are you thinking about pulling your kids from the school system like I did, but you're scared to death and don't know what to do next? My friends, I felt the same way, and you have come to the right place. I want to help your family leave the system so that you can take the hearts and minds of your children back. Hello, my friends. I'm very excited for today's topic. It is one of my very favorite things to discuss and actually to do. So let's jump right into it. When I was a teenager, I had a really good friend named Elizabeth. And she and I would get together and we would talk, and we loved to talk about wonderful stories and books and movies that we loved, like most teenagers do, right? But there was one thing that she would almost get misty-eyed over when she discussed this one thing, and that was every night her dad would gather all of the kids around, and they had, three teenagers and then a couple little kids, and he would read to them. And I remember one day she was talking to me about the book, The Scarlet Pimpernel, of which I love that movie from the 80s with Jane Seymour. And she's like, oh, there's this one part of the book, and last night as my dad was reading it, and he said it, and it was so beautiful. I mean, isn't that beautiful? I wrote it down, and she had written it down on a piece of paper and had carried it with her that day, what he had read, and she copied that part of the chapter. And she was totally enthralled by the book. And part of me was a little sad that my parents didn't read to me as a teenager. I mean, when I was really little, they would read me stories, but as a teenager, they didn't. And I think most people don't, because we go, oh, well, they're teenagers now. They can read themselves. But I remember that it was either that Christmas or the next Christmas, my mom decided she wanted to read a short story to us. And so she gathered us all around, those of us that were still left at home. And for 2.5 hours-ish, I remember laying on the floor and listening to my mom read this short Christmas story that she was given. And I loved it. I loved it. And here I was, a teenager, and I loved hearing the story. And my husband often says, I remember when I was in fifth grade, my fifth grade teacher reading this book or that book, and that was my favorite part of the whole day. I remember when I was in third grade, Miss Nabhan reading Charlie and the Chocolate Factory to us by Roald Dahl, and just being totally mesmerized by the story, and her reading How to Eat Fried Worms to us. And we always would go, please, just one more chapter, right? How many of you remember that? You remember being read to and it mattering. And it mattered, right? So that's what we're going to discuss today. We are going to discuss the beauty of read aloud. Now, if there is one thing you could get right in your homeschooling, you could fail at everything else, but if you can get this one thing right, even if it's not every day, but you try to do it close to each day, you're going to be a success and your kids will be just fine. And that one thing is reading aloud to your children and even your teenagers. What? Yes. It's interesting because our illiteracy rate is something like 20% leave high school illiterate. Like, don't quote me on that statistic, but I'd read recently it's somewhere around there that, like 20% of kids leave high school and graduate without being able to read, right? But what they found is no matter where in the world you go, the parents who read to their children, like the literacy rate amongst those children skyrockets, right? It skyrockets. And it doesn't, like, a lot of parents think that, oh, if I volunteer in the classroom, like I was the room mom forever for all of my kids, right? And don't think, oh, I was never the room mom, so therefore I'm a loser. No, I felt obligated to be the room mom. And once my daughter's preschool teacher said, if we don't have a room mom, we're not doing any parties. And I felt like that was a travesty. So I volunteered, even though I was like, I'm exhausted and this is my last one. What the heck? Okay. But anyway, when studies have been done to see like parents in the classroom and what volunteering helps, head and shoulders above everything else, most of those things didn't matter about, as far as the children's competency and their learning and everything. The parents in the classroom didn't make much of a difference. The thing that made a difference with children was their parents reading to them. Okay. More so than anything else. In the book, The Smartest Kids in the World by Amanda Ripley, this is what she says. She says, by contrast, I'm just going to start with this paragraph. Other parental efforts yielded big returns, the survey suggests. And she's discussing a survey about like parental involvement and how that helps children and why some countries are smarter than others. And it's a book about international education. Anyway, she goes, when children were young, parents who read to them every day or almost every day had kids who performed much better in reading all around the world by the time they were 15. It sounded like a public service cliche. Read to your kids. Could it be that simple? She continues. Yes, it could. Which was not to say that it was uninteresting. After all, what did reading to your kids mean? Well, done well, it meant teaching them about the world, sharing stories about faraway places, about smoking volcanoes and little boys who were sent to bed without dinner. It meant asking them questions about the book, questions that encouraged them to think for themselves. It meant sending a signal to kids about the importance of not just reading, but of learning about all kinds of new things. Close quote. So there we have it. That was the one big thing that helped kids throughout the world, no matter what country, was reading to these kids, which they found if teachers, even in high school, were to read to the kids, that the literacy rate would skyrocket. But they don't do that in schools very often anymore. And they certainly don't do it in high school. There's some that do, but not very many. The beautiful thing about you being at home with your kids is you get to read to them. And I know some of you are like, well, when they were in public school, I could read to them. But I guarantee, I know for me at least, once they got a little bit older, once they got into, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, I didn't read to them anymore. But early on, one of the books that I started studying early on in our homeschooling journey 3 years ago was I happened upon this book by Sarah Mackenzie. She's the founder of the Read Aloud Revival, and she wrote a book called The Read Aloud Family. And I thought, again, I still am. I pore over anything to do with education, homeschooling, history of education. I have quite an extensive library now, and I still go to the library also, and Audible is my friend and all the things. But this book really struck me. And she quotes Jim Trelease's Read Aloud Handbook, which she happened upon as well. But that's where it first hit me that maybe I should be reading aloud to my older kids. And so I happened upon her book early in our homeschooling journey. And so I started reading aloud to my kids. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. When we first started reading aloud, much like our first day of homeschooling and that first little while that we started homeschooling, it was a train wreck. I sat down with the kids and we started reading the book, and my teenagers, I was like, I am going to read to you children. Sit down, my little cherubs. And in my head, I had these, visions of beautiful moments of my children listening with great enthusiasm. And then I started reading, and they're like, are we almost done? And it was like, I looked at my watch and it had been like a minute and a half into my reading to them, right? I had chosen a chapter book. I was going to read to them. It was going to be beautiful. Nope, sure wasn't. Part of the problem was I chose a book that was not that interesting. And by the way, C.S. Lewis made reference that if a book isn't interesting to you, then it's not a good children's book, right? It has to be interesting to the adult too. So I had chosen a book that was frankly so dull. So our first few weeks of Read Aloud was terrible. And I was lucky to get through like 5 minutes of reading aloud to my kids without them getting annoyed. Except for my littles who would come and sit on my lap and then we would read picture books. So what I had to do was we had to build up time reading aloud. And I had to choose a more interesting and fascinating book that would hit everyone. And so I ended up letting go of that book. And part of me was like, no, we have to finish this book. Then the other part of me is like, this is not working. I'm bored. They're bored. I'm mad. They're mad. Everyone's mad. And this is supposed to be a great bonding experience and we're not bonding, right? So I had to switch books and I put it down. And if you get that way and you start in and you're reading and it's not working and you're 3 or 4 chapters in or 5 chapters in even, and they're not listening and they're annoyed and all the things, it's okay to change books. Put it down. You could come back to it another day or not at all, right? You're not married to the book. So I put down the book that we had been reading, which my kids found terribly dull. I don't even remember which one it was, but I put it down and I ended up picking up Where the Red Fern Grows and started reading that. And the first few chapters, again, we could only get through a few pages. And this is several weeks into our homeschooling journey. And I'd been trying really hard to do Read Aloud. I was going to be that inspiring mom. And the first few chapters, even Where the Red Fern Grows, were rough. But the more that we got into the story, and again, I'd start reading a little bit longer each time. It started like 3 minutes, and then we moved it up to 4 minutes, and then we moved it up to 5 and 6 minutes. But then as we started getting into the chapters, the time started to pass without us noticing. And I'd say, okay, we've got to be done now. And the kids would be like, wait, no, just one more chapter. And I'd look down, it had been like a half an hour. I remember the first time looking down going, oh my gosh, I have been reading to them for an entire hour and they didn't want me to stop. And so Where the Red Fern Grows, like by the middle of the book, they were just there with me, listening to everything with great intent. And I found it helped if I gave them something to do. So if the little kids could color or do puzzles or just work with their hands, like our hands have to be busy. There's power in us working with our hands, right? Their hands were busy. My older kids didn't necessarily need to do anything, but I found that my daughter would want to sketch, but she would listen to every single word I would say. And if I stopped, she'd be like, wait, no, don't stop. Keep going. And my son would be doing something with his hands, right? My oldest son at home. And so here we are, and at the time he was 13. So we're reading Where the Red Fern Grows. And I remember getting to that last chapter, and sorry, there's a spoiler. The dogs die. Don't tell your kids. They'll find out when you read the book. And we were all just sobbing as the dogs, as you find out Dan and Anne die, and just that heartbreak. But some really cool things happened, and I want to discuss as we read aloud. So let's discuss the beautiful things that come with reading aloud to your kids. Okay, let's discuss this. Okay, first of all, when you read aloud to your kids, now reading by themselves is good and important and all of that stuff. However, reading aloud is pretty stinking powerful for some other reasons. So let's go into that. First of all, reading aloud helps kids increase their reading comprehension. So Jim Trelease, who wrote the Read Aloud Handbook, 8th edition, says this. He goes, how is my child's reading going to get better if I'm doing the reading? And this is what he says. He says, it's actually the person who edited and revised by Cindy Georgis. And she says, in the previous edition of the Read Aloud Handbook, Jim Trelease shared that he would often ask his lecture audiences if there was anyone present who thought the little 3-letter word was a difficult one to understand. Out of 300 people, he would get about 5 who raised their hands amid the snickers from the rest. And that word was the. T-H-E. The. Like the cat. The dog. He then asked those who didn't raise their hand to pretend that I'm a Russian exchange student living in your home. It's also important to know that there's no equivalent word in Russian for the as we use it. Indeed, many languages, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Persian, Polish, Punjabi, Croatian, and Vietnamese don't have such articles. Now, as the Russian exchange student, I've been living in your home and listening to you and your family for 3 weeks when one day I come to you and say, I don't understand the word you use over and over. What means word the? How would you begin to explain the meaning of the to this person? Everyone in the audience would laugh in embarrassment. Defining this simple word is very difficult, yet most of us know how to use it by the time we showed up for kindergarten. So how did you learn it? One morning, when you were 3 years old, did your mother take you into the kitchen, sit you down at the table with a little workbook and say, the is a definite article. It comes before nouns. Now take your green crayon and underline all the definite articles on this page. Of course not. We learned the meaning of this tiny but complex word by hearing it. In fact, we heard it in 3 ways. And this is what he says. I continue. Number 1, over and over and over. We learn it by immersion. Number 2, from superheroes. Mom, dad, brother, and sister, role models. And number 3, in a meaningful context, the cookie, the crayons, the potty. Whenever an adult reads to a child, 3 important things are happening simultaneously and painlessly. Number 1, there's a pleasure connection being made between the child and the book. Number 2, both the parent and the child are learning something from the book and they're sharing, which is double learning. And number 3, the adult is pouring sounds and syllables called words into the child's ear. The research on oral comprehension versus reading comprehension certifies this concept and offers a sobering note about children who enter school with small vocabularies. Where you might expect the school to narrow the gap between the children with the small oral vocabularies and those with larger ones, the reverse is true. The disparity between those vocabularies widens instead of narrows. The reason is twofold. Number 1, since children in the early grades are reading only the words most often, most of them already know decodable text. Neither the slow nor the advanced child is meeting many new words in class through the books they are reading. And the students' only exposure to new or advanced language would have to be from parents and peers. At home, the child acquiring an expanded vocabulary is more likely to be read to from advanced books and to be exposed to educational television and to be engaged in meaningful conversation for longer periods of time. The child with a familiar vocabulary ends up hearing the same routine words without having the added stimuli. And so some cool things happen with reading comprehension. The children learn to decode words when they're read aloud to. The other thing that's really cool that happens as we read aloud is that whereas when a child is reading themselves or a teenager is reading themselves and they come upon a hard word, they have to decode that word to understand its meaning and understand the comprehension and how it all fits together, right? They have to figure out how to sound it out, how to figure out the syllables. And so they're not worried about the comprehension in those moments because they're trying to decode the words. They're trying to decode the language. Whereas when you and I are reading to our kids, they're able to hear the words and hear the words in context without having to decode the words visually. So it has a profound effect on the brain, and they're hearing these words again and again and again. It's interesting because chapter books and picture books have incredible vocabulary that we usually don't use in day-to-day language. Trelease also says, Jim Trelease in his book, he goes, children's books, even picture books, are much richer than ordinary home or classroom conversation. A study found that although parents can build their children's vocabularies by talking to them, reading to them is more effective. Reading aloud helps them to develop mastery and grammatical understanding, which is the basis for learning how to read. The study determined that picture books are 2 to 3 times as likely as parent-children conversations to include a word that isn't among the 5,000 most common English words. Consider for a moment the classic picture book, Where the Wild Things Are. In telling the story, author Maurice Sendak used words such as mischief, gnashed, and rumpus. These words are not commonly used in everyday conversations between parent and child or even in the classroom. He goes on, chapter books such as Charlotte's Web, which is often read aloud to younger children and contains that awesome opening sentence shared at the beginning of this chapter, which I'll read that to you very quickly before I continue with the quote. Where's Papa going with that axe? Said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. Whew, talk about an intro to books. That's an amazing one. Anyway, also provide extensive vocabulary. In chapter 6 of Charlotte's Web, you'll encounter the words morals, scruples, decency, consideration, compunctions, ancient, and untenable. Again, these words are not used on a daily basis in conversation with children. Reading books at a child's listening level rather than books at his reading level increases the probability that he will hear more profound vocabulary while also having the opportunity to engage in the dialogue with you about both the words and the story. It's interesting because I just read Charlotte's Web again to my kids this last year. And she's now 7, the 6-year-old at the time would ask me, she's like, wait, what does that word mean? And I said, well, from what it sounded like in the sentence, what did you think it means? And she would stop and say, oh, it means this, or, oh, it means that, right? She was able to understand the context of that word after I had read it to her in the context of the sentence. Like she could define it. In her own way, she could define the word because I had given her the context within the sentence that I had read it from. So it helps their reading comprehension because they don't have to decode the words, and it expands their vocabularies in a drastic, huge, immense way. Okay, so pretty stinking cool that it does that. What else does it do for us? Well, it also allows us to come much closer to our kids, which is pretty awesome. And I'm going to talk about that one in a second. But first, the other thing that it does is it increases and teaches empathy. So when a child is read to, yes, they see that they get to experience this when they read by themselves. But again, when you're reading with them, you get to experience the story together and you get to discuss the story with them. It enables the child to be face to face with greatness and live vicariously through these characters without actually experiencing or living these things themselves. They don't have to experience, they don't have to be on an actual ship, right? They get to live vicariously and see what great people would do in these situations, which is beautiful. Especially you look at classic literature and you have these heroes and heroines that are amazing and you go, man, I want to emulate them. So I'm a big fan of To Kill a Mockingbird, one of my favorite books. And oftentimes I look to Atticus Finch. I'm like, what would Atticus Finch have done? I look at his character, right? He was a fictitious person, but I can still emulate how to be because of that literature. Well, our kids are no different. So we were reading Anne of Green Gables and my daughter said to me, she's like, Mom, Sometimes I ask myself, what would Anne do in this situation? What would Anne do? And so she's able to live vicariously, but also take those things that she learns in her life. Now, my friends, I don't know if you're aware of this, but a lot of what's being read to or asked, there's not a lot of reading to once you're in high school and public school, but a lot of what's being asked of students to read is horrific, and it's being passed off as literature. My daughter's friend came over and we were talking about, what she had been reading and about her literature class. And she's like, Mrs. Daniels, I was so disappointed in my literature class. I love classic literature. And the class title was classic literature, which would suggest that we would be reading classics. She goes, I was expecting maybe Les Miserables. I was expecting maybe, A Tale of Two Cities or something. She goes, no, we read literature that frankly, in my opinion, was just straight up porn. And it was contemporary literature. And it even went against all of the things that my parents have been teaching me as far as values go. And she went on to tell me about the book. And I was like, oh my gosh, that would make me vomit. She goes, I got to the point that I told the teacher I did not want to read this book anymore because it was straight up trash, in my opinion. It was straight up pornography. And I didn't need that in my life. And the characters weren't even redeeming. Right. So I thought that was really fascinating because here's this wonderful 17-year-old girl who's astute and smart. And then she was annoyed because she's like, and in my literature class, we didn't even discuss the book. He would just have us read other people's thoughts on the books and then write about other people's thoughts, as opposed to what do we think about it and asking us what we thought about it and then having really great discussion. Didn't happen. Right. So yeah, another X against the public school system there. But here we are. But when we're at home and we're choosing the literature for our children, or they bring something to us and we start to read with them, they get to see greatness in these characters, and they get to emulate that, and they get to experience these stories, and they get to experience different things that they wouldn't normally experience. They get to live a million lifetimes. Dr. Seuss said, the more that you read, the more things you will know, the more you will learn, the more places you'll go. The great American novelist J.R.R. Martin said, a reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies. The man who never reads lives only one. I love also that we read to know that we are not alone. And when we read with our children, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, something else beautiful happens. That beautiful thing is that we become closer to our kids. There's that shared experience in the story that draws us closer to them and them closer to us. Not to mention the fact that when they're sitting next to you and snuggled next to you, or they're sitting on your lap and you're reading together and they hear your voice and these characters, that they're physically close to you. But it creates an emotional connection that is so powerful and so beautiful. Again, for some of you that are starting this out, and if you're reading with older kids, it's going to take time. But once it starts to happen, it's really, really beautiful. One of the things that you can do to get your children's heart back and their hearts and souls back to you is to read with them, even when they're older. They still will appreciate a beautiful, beautiful story. And it might be that you're like, but I'm tired and I don't want to have to read to them. Well, fine, get it on Audible. Go to the library, get it where you can hook it to your phone and listen to it. That works too. They're still getting all the benefits, and you can still be close to them, and then you don't have to read. So if that's a case where you're like, sometimes I don't want to read, or I can't, I get tired. You'll listen to it on Audible. Chronicles of Narnia, we've been listening to on Audible. And it's so funny because my kids now in the car, they're like, can we listen? Turn on Audible. We want to listen to the story. And they're totally mesmerized by the story. And we'll laugh at certain parts and we'll stop it and pause it and discuss certain things and chuckle. And sometimes I'll stop it and pause it and we'll talk about a moral lesson, right? And so if you're like, I just can't read all the time to the kids, that's okay. You can use an audiobook. It's okay. And you're not a loser if you do that. It's fine, right? And so for me, but I also started thinking, someday when I'm dead and gone, I want my kids to hear the sound of my voice reading certain books to them. I hope that my kids will hear my voice as we talk about, as they reread someday Charlotte's Web. But there's that piece of bringing us closer together as a family when we do read beautiful stories together, when we read aloud together. This beauty happens to bond us. And it creates this shared, amazing experience that we're not going to get other ways. It's beautiful. And if you can do it every day, even if you don't do anything else, you'll have succeeded for the day. It's enough. It's enough. Now, again, your first few weeks might be rough, and that's okay. Give yourself grace. With everything, it's the first time you try things, they're going to be rough, and you have to give yourself grace. But I want to share a story with you as we're closing up here for today. And that is, so last year I had a friend whose husband was deploying for the very last time. He was retiring after that from the military, and it was going to be his last deployment. And he was going to deploy right after Christmas. Thankfully, they weren't going to deploy until right after Christmas. And my friend said to me, she's like, she was struggling with it because she was worried, what if he doesn't come home? And it's his last deployment. And he was going to a dangerous place. And I wanted to give her something. I wanted to give her a gift. I wanted to give her something that mattered, something that was meaningful for Christmas. And so I had been thinking about it all November because I knew he'd be deploying in January. And I wanted to give their family, I wanted to give them time is what I wanted to give them because that's what she wanted. She wanted time with him, but I couldn't give that. I am not God. I don't have power over time. And so I racked my brain. I prayed about it. I'm like, what could I give her that is something that matters, that would matter to their family? And then one day I'm driving along and this thought came. Give her a basket of books. Give her a basket of books and give her some rules. And so this is what I did. As I told her, I said, hey, I've got a gift for your family that I want to bring by. I'll bring it by at the end, next week, if that's okay. It was right before Thanksgiving. And I said, I'll bring it by after Thanksgiving. The week after Thanksgiving, I'm going to stop by with this gift. And that gave me enough time also to order what I needed to order. So I bought her all these books, these picture books about Christmas. She's got 3 kids and the oldest is like 10 or 11 and the youngest was like 1.5. And then she had one that was like 5-ish. And so I bought all these Christmas books, these Christmas anthologies and Christmas poems and these beautifully illustrated books. And so I was so excited and I put it in a beautiful basket with Christmas fabric in it. And then I got a canister of hot cocoa and that they could make and a canister of marshmallows to go with the hot cocoa. And I went to their house when her husband was home and I said, okay. And I let them know I'm going to come this night. And so it was right before December started. And I said, hey, okay, I've got this basket of books for you. This is my gift to you. This is my family's gift to you this Christmas season. I cannot give you more time, but I can give you more quality time for the little time that you have left together until you get home. And I said, and every night, your job is to read one story or one poem. And if the kids like a story particularly, that you could reread it several days in a row, and that's fine. The only rule is you have to read one thing as a family every single night. Even if it's short, even if it's just a poem, that's fine. Just one thing every night. That's the only rule of this Christmas book basket. Right. So the month goes through, he deploys, and I see her, and I keep in regular contact with her to make sure she's doing okay. And that if she needs anything, I'm there, right? I gotcha, my friend. And I said, how did it go? How did the Christmas reading go? And she teared up and she's like, you could not have given us a better gift. She said, my kids would climb onto his lap and he would read to them. And she's like, and they would, you were right. They had him read a couple of the books again and again and again. And I mostly let him do the reading. I did the reading sometimes when he was really tired. But they laughed and laughed, and we had such a beautiful experience as a family. And you gave us better time together, which is exactly what I wanted to give them. I wanted to give them a beautiful shared experience together before he left. Because by golly, if anything happened to him, I wanted their last memories to be good ones as a family. So the great news is he came home a month ago. He's doing great. He's doing well. And their family's back together as a full family unit. But that's what I wanted to give her. And it ended up being a perfect gift. And I honestly feel like there was a little bit of inspiration from the divine on that one, because I'm like, I prayed. I'm like, what could I give them? I can't give them more time, but I could give them more quality time together through reading aloud, because I saw how it affected my family. I saw how it affected my kids. It's interesting. The other night, we did all of these fun things as a family. My husband was actually at work, but I took the kids and we did all these fun things. And I made sure we had all these fun activities that we did before we started officially schooling again in the fall. Even though we do a little bit of school during the summer, I want to do, in the fall, we're going to do more schooling, right? So as a family, but the last thing I did that night was read to the kids. We snuggled together, we read some stories together, and then I put the kids to bed. So I'm tucking in my 11-year-old son, my adventurous, free-spirited, loves black diamonds, double black diamond skiing son, and who's like, he just loves adrenaline and all this stuff. And we did adrenaline. He was a little adrenaline junkie that day. And when I tucked him in, I always ask the two questions. What did you do today? What was your happiest part of the day? And what did you do today to make Jesus happy? Right? I'm unabashedly Christian, so I ask those questions. You don't have to ask those questions. That's what I ask my kids every single night. It's what my parents asked me when I was getting tucked in every night. Continue that tradition with my kids. So I ask those questions every night. Same questions. What was your happiest part of the day? And what did you do today to make Jesus happy? And my adrenaline junkie son, who had an adrenaline-filled day, said to me, "It was when you read to me, Mom. I loved it. I always love it. It was when you read to me." So that's my challenge for you, is to start reading aloud to your kids. Start small and go from there. To close today, I want to finish with a poem for you. It's called The Reading Mother by Strickland Gilliland. I had a mother who read to me sagas of pirates who scoured the sea, cutlasses clenched in their yellow teeth, blackbirds stowed in their hold beneath. I had a mother who read to me lays of ancient and gallant and golden days, stories of Marmion and Ivanhoe, which every boy has a right to know. I had a mother who read me tales of Gellert the hound of the hills of Wales, true to his trust till tragic his death, faithfulness blent with his final breath. I had a mother who read me things that wholesome life to the boy heart brings, stories that stir with an upward touch. Oh, that each mother of boys were such. You may have tangible wealth untold, caskets of jewels and coffers of gold. Richer than I, you can never be. I had a mother who read to me. Thank you so much for listening. And if you like this podcast, please be sure to sign up for our weekly newsletter at schooltohomeschool.com. That's school, T-O, homeschool.com. Join our private Facebook group, School to Homeschool, and follow me on Instagram, Janae.Daniels.